series. It's on Proposal Writing 101. And just take this time to recognize that we're joining, I'm joining in from Treaty 1 territory here in Winnipeg. And with this webinar series, our hope was to provide some tools, information for communities to take forward, to use within their organization, within their region, within their community. So the next webinar we will have is next month, and it'll be on the last Thursday of the month. And that webinar is going to be on Archives 101. So these ones we kind of shifted compared to the other ones, but that was at what was people were requesting. So we'll get started with the Proposal 101. And I'll just share my screen here. So if you have any questions, if you could put them in the Q&A box, we'll do our best to answer them. And if we don't know, we'll let you know. We will have an email. There will be a survey at the end as well to provide feedback about the webinar, and also to put forward what kind of training and support that you would need within your entity. And we also have a conference at the end of the webinar series, which will be in January 2025, and it's the Data Sovereignty and Research Conference here in Winnipeg. So welcome to our webinar on Proposal 101. I'll start. So we do have Dr. Wanda Phillips-Beck who will join us for the second half. This first half is more of a general about data sovereignty, about proposal writing. It'll just give you an overview of what to expect when it comes to writing proposals. So just in general, when we look at this, there are different types of proposals that are written. And for the specific topic that we're talking about, the second part will be research-based. So it'll be a little bit of a shift. This here is for like perhaps a grant or perhaps a funding proposal that you'll see online, or a call out for proposal. And you have to understand that there's different types of proposals. So when we look at proposals, sometimes proposals can ask for like a written document. Sometimes it'll ask for an application in an application format. They'll have a template for you. But whatever it is, we will provide general information of what is included in that proposal. So basically, and this could be any way, there's no, for this specific first part, you could either see a source of funding that's available for you, or you might not see or you might have an idea and you might want to seek out source of funding. So the very first part is, and I'll just go from this route, is like if you have an idea, it's kind of write that idea down, or to look into it, or to explore it. And then either this might be the second step or the first step, but it's to really research those sources of funding. So there's a lot of different links that are available online. There's different portals depending on what type of funding that you're looking for. So for example, if you're looking for, let's say if you're looking for funding for language, you know, there might be a call out, say on Heritage Canada, for language funding. Always keep in mind when you look at source of funding is to look at the date of application. So say, for example, if I did find that Heritage Canada, and I actually looked it up yesterday and I noticed that the funding call is closed now for the new year. But just to keep in mind that there are deadlines for certain sources of funding. Some funding calls might be open source. So they might have something that's just as people submit them, like a continuous intake. Or sometimes what can happen with funding is that it could be quarterly. So maybe they have funding open the first quarter, maybe they have it open second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter. But what I would really encourage people to do within this area is to really seek out what types of funding. And when you take a look at this, look at for-profit, nonprofit, government, institutions. And what I would say about this area here is sometimes people might be stuck to an idea and they might just think it has to be specifically related to that idea. And an example I'll give you is that once upon a time ago, we were doing a project on youth leadership. And you would often think that you would have to find funding directly connected to youth leadership. Lo and behold, we actually found a funding source that was connected to farming. And you might not see that connection and relate it, but in their eyes is that when you have people doing leadership in the community like that, or have leadership skills, that they perhaps could have leadership skills to look after a farm. So what I would say is be very open to the ideas. And then another example I would say is that, often there used to be a fund through Manitoba, province of Manitoba, for activities, for sports related, for wellness. And we did once, a few times actually, access that funding, but it was more about movement and it was for traditional youth gathering. So, for example, going on in a nature walk, we also looked at survival skills. We also looked up setting up a sweat, which involves activity because you're going out into the forest. You're going to go look for those, for whatever it is that you need. You're bringing it back. You're doing active motion by forming the sweat lodge, all that kind of stuff. So never think outside of the box when it comes to funding sources. And if you could find someone, or if you have time, is to start generating that list and creating it. Now, I talked about that idea. One of two ways I mentioned is that you might have an idea, you might have a source of funding, or it might be the other way, but you want to start to brainstorm who needs to be involved. Sometimes when I see people put funding in or proposals in, they might have this idea and they might move it forward in general by themselves, but they don't involve the partners that they list in it. What you want to do is you want to actually invite those people right from the beginning. So some questions you might want to ask is, who do I need to include within the community organization? So if it's a community based, who in my community should be involved in this work, or who can I invite to meetings to start forming this idea even more? What partners do I need to invite to be part of this discussion? Maybe you have the education department. Maybe you have economic development, whatever it might be. And then also internally and externally. So internally within your organization, if you have other teams that are doing the work, who can you involve from the other teams? Externally, who can you connect with outside, even outside of the community, who can you connect with? And that all needs to happen in the beginning. So when you do that, I would encourage you, if that's you that's doing that, is to gather more information that you can. So basically what you're trying to do when you look at, when you put a proposal together, is you're trying to show that what you have is the best idea. One thing that I would totally recommend for people to do is print out that application to review details. Or you could even have it online, put it in Adobe, and you could a PDF it, and you could even highlight it, or even take out a actual highlighter and highlight it. But it's very important to look at what criteria is needed. Sometimes by just looking at the criteria, you can see if you fit into it. Sometimes you might not fit because it might not cover your organization or your whatever entity, your community. But you always want to look at the criteria. And then you also want to look at what can be funded and what can't be funded, so that you can know that within your proposal when you're developing it. So what I would really encourage is that printing out, reading it, looking at it, and then you might want to have an initial meeting, or actually you should have an initial meeting with all who needs to be involved to start developing that idea. So that's what's going to make your, whatever it is that you're doing, that's what's going to make it stronger. But you're going to have all these minds come together and to start thinking of what needs to happen and also what needs to be put into that proposal. When you have an idea that's more concrete, people who are reviewing proposals are more likely to see that. And the other thing that you might, and you still want to continue gathering information here. And the other thing that you do want to do is you want to connect with the funder. I can't stress how important this is. That relationship building with the funder is important to the whole overall proposal development and funding, getting funding. So if that means you calling the funder to say, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm interested in this funding or this proposal that you have out, or this funding opportunity that you have out, am I able to receive information? When you connect with that funder, you're able to find out more exactly what it is that they're looking for. And then also you could see if you're a good fit or not with whatever it is that's proposed. Oftentimes what you'll notice is with government funding, they usually have information sessions. I can't stress how important those are. Sometimes people will say, oh, it's an hour long, it's online, I don't want to sit there. That's kind of pretty much a guide of what they want you to do. And that's kind of like a cheat sheet. Like it's not even cheating, they're giving you the information, but it's like giving that information that so that you could be well, like know what they want in the proposal, what they're looking for. And when I say with this part here, how important it is, I'll just give you an example. This one time we applied for funding through a specific area. The language that I used originally, if I didn't have that partnership with them, they would have said no. Or that partnership. If I didn't have that, I should say that connection with that funder, they would have said no. But because of connecting, they were able to review the proposal and they had suggestions and they noted that some of the language used would not fit with what they have for criteria to switch the language or to make sure that the language is geared towards this to access the funding. Even though the work that we were doing was very important, they wanted to make sure that we were able to access the funding by doing that and making sure that they speak their language. So that connection with that funder is very, very important. Another thing that you might want to do, because if you've been meeting and have that group with you, is assign author or authors to complete the sections. So that would be getting people to come on board to write. That's important. And then all throughout this process in the beginning, when you're talking, it's all about staying in contact with the partner. So what we put this to here we use for data sovereignty, but it's just about an ideal relationship when it comes to the research. This goes the same thing with the proposal. Is like if you see the two footsteps there, you're walking together with your partners while you're going through this proposal opportunity, this developing this idea. You're walking together, you're making sure that you're doing it in a good way. So one thing that I'll take note here is that in general, a proposal must be tailored to the source of funding you're applying for. So what you'll notice is when you apply for jobs, your resume should be tailored to the job that you're applying for. And that's the same thing with the proposals. That's why it's important to review that material to see what it is that they're asking for. If they have a template, that's why it's important to go to those information sessions. This list is just a general idea of what is needed. It could change. There might be something less, there might be something in addition. But overall, in general, the basics for many proposals are the following. So that cover letter. So a cover letter should be short and sweet. It should have your letterhead. It should state what funding you're applying for, how much you're applying for, who your contact person is, and that would be the top of the page. The title page, ideally, that would be the title of your project, and it will differ. You'll see with Wanda's presentation how it might differ with academic, but it would be the title of your proposal and maybe the date, who you're submitting it to, and who the author is. That table of contents, that will be what's in the proposal. Sometimes our proposals might be a little bit longer, sometimes they might be short. That organization, I'm going to skip the summary and I'll come back to it. But the organization information, who is applying for the funding? That would be sharing perhaps your mission, your vision, all that kind of stuff about your organization. People that are the funders or even the funding review committees want to know who it is that's applying. This is where you would share. The need for the project. So I mentioned before about how when you do a proposal, you're kind of showing that this is a need, this is what we're going to do to help that need. So in this section, sometimes people don't know what to put. This would be kind of like if pretend that you're a lawyer or pretend that this is the funny way to think about it. Pretend that you're in an argument, you're trying to prove your argument to your partner or whoever it is. And you're saying, well, this is the reason, and this is A, B, C, and D. That's exactly what you're doing in this project. You're stating because you stated, or you're stating what the project is, but you're stating why the project is needed. So for example, if it was something to do with health and wellness, and you're talking about mental health, you might give some stats, some data, some information that like facts, that's data that could connect to that and to show that. You can even pull out stuff from reports. That's why it's important to kind of see what has been written in different reports, and you could pull some of that out. If your community or your organization has reports, if your region has reports, that would be kind of just building that case. That's what you're doing for the need for the project. The project description basically is describing what the project's going to be like. So it's explaining what you're going to do. It's like kind of like maybe answering the 5 W's: what, who, where, when, why. But your why is more of the need for the project. So that project description is just basically that description. The goals and objectives. So if you could think of an umbrella, a goal would be like the overall goal of your project. That's like the bigger umbrella. When you get down, that would be your objectives. So I talked about, say, the health and wellness. Maybe, and this is just a really overall broad goal, just to give you an idea. Maybe it's to improve the health and wellness of our community. That would be the overall goal. And one of the objectives that I mentioned was, or one of the areas was mental health. Maybe it was to be done by focusing on mental health, whatever that might be. Your work plan, I noticed that I didn't have activities here, but activities is very much part of that. So if we think about that objective of that mental health, maybe one of the activities that connects to that objective for an activity can be doing let's say mindfulness, practicing mindfulness and yoga. That could be one objective for mental health. Another one could be information sessions about mental health. That could be another one. So your activities always should connect to your objectives, which are like a bigger, broader area, and then your goal, which is even broader. The project work plan, that's basically kind of like listing out your activities, who's going to do it, what date you're planning on doing it. This project work plan is important. And what I would really encourage people to do when you do a work plan in here, print it out or have it somewhere so that if you do get funded, you could literally go through and add an extra, maybe even an extra column to put a notes and if you completed it or not. But this way you could make sure that you're keeping on track with your proposal that you have written if it got funded. The description of the project team. So who is going to be involved with this team? Who's working on it? Who's the coordinator? Whatever that might be. The risks and mitigation. So there's a lot of things that might happen, that could impact your proposal or the work that you're proposing to do. It's just showing how you can reduce those risks or what you can do to help counter that. And one of the risks that I bring up when I often do these sessions that we would have never ever guessed with COVID-19, because COVID-19 happened, no one knew it was going to happen. That was something that we were not able to plan for. But let's say with that mental health area, and if I was doing those workshops, let's say that the place that I was going to access sometimes might not be available. So it would be the scheduling and the availability. So I would have to have a backup plan for that. What that would be my mitigation. So maybe that means that I could look out to other areas that I could connect with where I could potentially host that workshop. So basically you're just trying to show that if something comes up, you have a plan B, a plan C, something that could help reduce that or solve it. The evaluation plan. I know funders really like evaluations to show that whatever you're doing is meeting whatever you stated that you're going to do. That evaluation plan is, it could be a third party, so someone outside of your organization community, or it could be internal, someone within who might do that evaluation plan. But that could be an evaluation, that could be your feedback forms. If you have a pre and a post questionnaire, whatever you use to measure, that's the evaluation plan. And one thing that I noted that I did not have on this list was outcomes. an indicator. So people want to know if you've done your activity, what is going to be the outcome and how are you going to know it? What's the indicator? And they often really like concrete examples, and not something that could be measured by Western way. That's potentially what they'd like to see. So even though you might understanding that, even though we might have our own ways, um, never to say no because the funder doesn't want that. You could do our ways, but you could also do Western ways. The conclusion just basically of the proposal is just summing up the proposal itself. The budget, this here, it does take a bit of time to do the budget. Often with the budget, all your activities have to be connected to the budget. Sometimes when we write proposals, people will put money towards a position. You have to see if they will or not. If it is, then put it in there, put it based on whatever, and this is how much they'll for the year. But also to include items like perhaps maybe your meeting space, all that kind of stuff that could be connected to your activities should be in there. And I know over the years, let's say if we did a proposal for building a cabin, pretend part of that mental health was to build a lodge and to build a cabin. And over the years, we know the cost of lumber has changed. So if you've done a proposal before and you costed it out, make sure that you take a look again because prices are increasing and we have to take that into consideration. And generally, give yourself a little bit of room because like say for example, if we were having an event and we brought out people, and this really happened actually, we had a big conference that was held on the East Coast. We brought out people, but we never ever took into consideration the fact of fog and that planes might not be able to go out. So in this whole budget, in the area, we did not take into consideration that aspect, understanding that the funder was on board and knew what had happened, but always making sure um, all throughout this when you're doing a project, you're communicating with with the funder if you do get funded. So the budget always connects to the activities. And then the appendices, that's basically stuff that supports. So let's say for that organization, if you have that articles of incorporation, your board of directors, whatever it is that needs to support the proposal, for those partners that you have, perhaps you have handouts of those partners pages in there. And then those letters of support are very important. So for those people who are coming on board with you, have those letters of support in your appendices. If you have people doing the project team, perhaps maybe even have some of the items in there about the project team more in detail. The appendices are the additions to help support the overall proposal. And one thing that I noted was with the executive summary, that the summary was the last part to do. That's because you're summarizing your whole stuff that you've put together. It should be about maybe a paragraph. It's just summarizing very short and sweet what the proposal is all about. So those are some items of a proposal, very general. As I mentioned before, if you do get funding, let's say if you were successful in your proposal, always to keep in contact with that funder and have those open lines of communication. Sometimes things might change, some activities might change. So by having those lines of communication open and by having that relationship that we established from the beginning, we're able to connect with them and say, you know what, it looks like we might not do activity A. We have an alternate activity. And in this way, with those lines of communication, they most likely will be understanding. One thing that I'll point out is and I'll encourage, if you've never had a chance to review proposals, this really helps out. By reviewing other people's proposals, you know what goes into that whole process. So it's kind of like a checklist. I used to review proposals. I've done it a few times. And it's kind of like whatever we had set out in the criteria, that's why I said printing out the page, is looking if people put that in their proposal. And when you take a look at the aesthetic of it, clean, simple, use simple language, straight to the point, and also very clear. Having those paragraphs, having those headers, So for example, if you have executive summary, have that header, then have that information. When it comes to organization information, have that header, have that information. So this way people don't have to keep flipping through the pages when they're reviewing it. Everything is right there in that section. And as I mentioned, this is just general. There might be more things that they might ask for, but just to really be aware of that by reviewing it. So I'm going to end my portion with the general parts. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us here at the Data Sovereignty team. But we are going to shift towards the academic side, and I'll turn it over to Wanda. I'll stop sharing my screen. And I apologize I wasn't able to see questions if you had. And yes, wouldn't outcomes and indicators also be tied into SMART goals? Yes. So that would be tied in. And Wanda's going to talk about SMART goals a little bit more. So what you can probably do with both of them is combine what you have learned from both sessions for your proposal. And with that, I'll turn it over to Wanda to share.
Thanks, Carla. And I just wanted to add to Carla's presentation as well. And I apologize, I'm in an open area, so you might have some background noise. When you get a request for proposals, for instance, you'll sometimes see all the sections that are outlined that they will be looking for in the proposal, sometimes just copying and pasting that as a template so you can ensure that you've covered all the different topics that they want covered in the proposal. I found that very useful to be able to do that. So thank you, Carla, and I'll share my presentation now. Okay, can you see that okay?
Yeah, we can see good.
Okay, awesome. So thanks, Carla, for that. And everything that Carla had talked about and mentioned in the proposal writing in the generic sense will apply to the academic proposals as well. But with academic proposals, they sometimes will require a little bit more specific and detail that pertain to providing that rationale for why it is that you are applying for this funding. And I think it's very important to know this aspect of writing proposals because more and more communities and tribal councils and organizations are doing their own research. And organizations such as FNHSSM are eligible to receive and hold research funds now, and more organizations are moving in that direction. And sometimes it's an art to writing the proposals to be successful, because there is a lot of competition out there when it comes to accessing research dollars. So in Canada, we have 3 primary funding bodies, and the Canadian Institute for Health Research is one of these. And they are primarily invested in funding health research, but there are other funding bodies that provide funding for health and social research and other environmental studies. So I'm just going to go through just basically the purpose of accessing funding for research purposes and talk about some of the key areas that need to be covered in the research proposal and just some pointers for success. So basically, I've summarized the steps to writing an academic proposal into 5 steps. And number 1 is that title. And Carla talked about the title of your proposal. Sometimes we'll give an indication of what they will find in the proposal. But for an academic proposal, sometimes you have to be very clear that when the reviewers are reading the proposal, that they're going to see what you're asking for and how. So they want to see, have an idea about what they're going to be reading in the proposal. Step 2 is providing that rationale and that background and that introduction to the topic. So often in research proposals, you'll have to speak to the issue that you're going to be applying funding for. So for instance, in diabetes research in First Nation communities, It's important to have a really good grasp on the current research around diabetes in First Nation communities and provide that background information in the proposal as well. Step 3 is creating that problem statement and being very clear about what the issue is that you are studying or the project that you will be initiating, because sometimes you'll have research funding specifically to do a research project, or there will be dollars allocated for projects. Both of them will require a research component or require you to do some knowledge translation, either in academic publications or workshops or everything that you could think of in terms of knowledge to action or knowledge transfer. But they will sometimes have slightly different purposes. So you'll have a research project to do entirely just research, or you may have a project, but you will have an evaluation or a research component to that project. So it's important to have a very clear problem statement and creating those goals and objectives that go with that will clearly state what your research project is going to do. And I'm going to go through each of those in a little bit more detail. And then there's the step 4, and this is where sometimes communities or organizations will seek help from academics or someone who is very skilled at looking at how you can conduct the research so that your methods is actually going to align with your methodology, and your design of your project will actually be able to get at that information that you say that you're going to provide in the end. So there's sometimes a bit of a skill or a bit of an art to looking at what it is that you want to produce in the end in terms of an outcome, but you also be very specific about how you're going to collect that information and how you're going to design your research project so that it matches what your outcome will be. So in terms of the purpose as well, you have to be very clear that what you are researching or what the topic or the issue that you're going to be looking at, to be very clear about the purpose of your project. And sometimes that will involve a lot of conversations or having some sit downs with some of the partners, because most research projects now involve partnership models or intercollaborations or interdisciplinary work. So being very clear about what it is that you are going to do and the purpose. And then in every proposal, just being very aware of who your audience is. In this case, accessing research funds, it will be the reviewers that will be looking at the proposal in its entirety and writing that proposal so that you're sitting like a reviewer at the end. So being aware of who that audience is, and so that if you're sitting on the other end and you're asking the questions, that you can answer them yourself. So I've been a reviewer of proposals as well. And so it's often a really good way to be to learn about writing really good proposals, because there are often proposals that come through and they are not clear. They are not, their goals don't match the outcomes that they want to achieve, and so on and so forth. So sitting as a reviewer sometimes is very helpful. And then, again, clearly outlining the rationale for your ask. So this is where I just wanted to mention a little bit about the title. It should be clear enough to clue the reviewer that what is contained within the proposal is what they're going to be reading. I've read proposals that have come through that have had titles. For instance, I'm just going to throw this out there, Nanandaway-Wagamig. And with no qualifier at the end. And so if you add Nanandaway-Wagamig, creating a place of healing for First Nations people. So you have the what and that, and then you have the outcome. And I have an example here, establishing a family-centered example establishing a family-centered circle of care in Hollow Water toward improving prenatal and culturally safe care. So you see that it's the what. You want to be clear about what it is that you are asking for, and that's creating a family-centered circle of care. And then your outcome, you have a clue to what the outcome is. So improving prenatal care and culturally safe care. So the introduction section sometimes, again, requires a little bit of skill, a little bit of sifting through the literature and reports. And just like Carla mentioned in her presentation, is providing that data and clearly providing the rationale for what it is that you are going to be researching. So the background will often give the reviewers an idea that you have done your homework. So sometimes communities or organizations will contract an academic or a student to compile the literature, because sometimes it does take a little bit of skill, but sometimes it's just a matter of looking through reports and papers, including that evidence in there that leads up to your ask. So reviewing the literature, knowing who to ask for help, and often you'll have even students maybe that are working in the community back home in the summertime, and you approach them and say, hey, I'm thinking of doing research or applying for funding to do a research project, and then asking them to help, because students often that study in universities are very good at sifting through the literature and synthesizing it. And here, and I'm finding funders are more and more open to including traditional knowledge and insights about the issue. So just very recently, I've applied for funding looking at improving breastfeeding supports for mothers and First Nation mothers, particularly as they leave the communities and come into the cities to give birth. So we know that breastfeeding supports are very sparse, and sometimes if they are provided, it's not done in a culturally safe way. So I am working on a proposal to access funding to look at creating a new model of support for First Nation women. And I included knowledge that I learned through working with the Grandmothers Council around breastfeeding. And I included that in the proposal because now more and more you have to demonstrate as well that if you're looking at creating a program of support or doing a research project around improving culturally safe care, we also have to know that we've done our background and we're working in a good way with our knowledge keepers, and our community knowledge is included. So just as an example, and I'm just throwing this out there, prenatal care in First Nation communities. So you want to improve prenatal care rates in your communities, and you think that the present way of doing prenatal care is not working because women have to go make an appointment to in the primary care clinic or in the city, often that is maybe more than an hour's drive away, and it's just not working. So they, rather than try to make an appointment or to travel those distances, women are just opting not to get prenatal care. So then, so you've had some community meetings and discussions and conversations in the community, and you think that maybe doing a circle model of care that involves more than just visiting a healthcare provider, but maybe bringing people together to provide group prenatal care, so that they have the fathers involved, they have the grandmothers involved, they have the aunties involved. So you want to create a circle model of care. So then what we want to do is maybe look to see if this has been done in other places, and then look to see if they've had really good descriptions of that model, and maybe you want to use that model, or maybe you want to adapt it in some way. So then you provide and you look for that evidence, so that this has been tried somewhere else and it has been evaluated and it had worked. Then you want to include that information in there. You also want to include information on the issue that you are looking at. So you are seeing that women are not getting prenatal care in your communities, then you might want to go look through the literature to see what prenatal care rates are in more generally. So in the Manitoba population, I know that the prenatal care rates for First Nation women living in rural and remote communities are lower. So you can include that information and you can cite that source as well. And then you can include information that might impact prenatal care in your communities. So we know that traveling long distances, delivering their babies away from home, lack of support while they are away from home after they have their babies is a factor. So you include all of that information in your proposal that will help support the argument that you want to create a new model of care and you want to do an evaluation of that model of care and you want to be able to publish on those outcomes. So, but you can also include what knowledge keepers have to say. And I worked with the Grandmothers Council in my dissertation, for instance, and I sat with them and I learned from them around traditional breastfeeding practices and how we supported women to breastfeed in the past. So I included that in that information in that proposal as well, because this is our traditional knowledge or ancient knowledge that has supported us for since time immemorial. Immemorial. Oh my gosh, I'm having trouble. I need to eat. Since for many generations, breastfeeding has been the only way that we have fed our babies, and we had a lot of ceremony and teachings around breastfeeding, the importance of bonding, the importance of the sacred waters that pass between mother and baby. So I included all that in the proposal as well, especially if you are talking about improving culturally safe care. So you want to include that important traditional knowledge as well. So, and then, but you also want to be able to cover what the solution is. So you want to, yes, provide enough information around the issue and supporting the issue, but you also want to provide a balanced perspective on the solutions as well. So if you're proposing a circle model of care, for instance, then looking for that data and that literature and to support that as well. So for example, that I used here with the new model of care in the community, look for those models that exist somewhere else and where maybe they have been some publications on it, or there have been some reports that are available on websites around that model of care. So include that as well. So you want to talk about the issue, but you also want to talk about the solutions. And include that information where if the model has been tried somewhere else, then if it has been evaluated, including that evaluation information. So Carla mentioned the partners. In an academic sense, they will require you to talk about the teams as well. So who will be actually doing and implementing the intervention or the model in this case? And in the research literature, we often talk about the program or the model that you're implementing as the intervention. So when you are talking from a community perspective around trying a new model, who will be implementing that model? So you have to be sure to include all of those community partners as well in the proposal, especially those that will be implementing it in the community at the community level. So in this case, it will be most likely nurses or CPNP, or maybe you have birth helpers in the community, or maybe you have midwives. So all of those people that will be involved in the implementation side, be sure to include them as partners. And then on the research end, and from those people that will be helping you, with the research parts and collecting information and analyzing some of that information. Be sure to include those academic partners that I just basically use this as an example. So for instance, in my breastfeeding project, I will be one of the researchers, and Carla in Cochrane could be one of the researchers as well, including the health director as one of the community level researchers, because more than likely the health directors will be involved in helping to collect some of this data at the community level. And if you have a research coordinator, if you have identified a research coordinator in your proposal, be sure to include these individuals. And this is just an example, just providing the evidence. And here I just included a graph of prenatal care in First Nation communities versus all of Manitoba. And you can find this evidence in some of the reports that are produced by the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy at the University of Manitoba, or you can use the published reports and research in this area, or you can look at previous studies that have been done specific to this population. And in this case, I had done some, I collected some data around prenatal care in First Nation communities for my dissertation. Again, just some other data, if you have access to information where there have been other models, just showing that evidence is part of your introduction as well. So I just wanted to take a little time, talk about the problem statement. So after providing all the evidence and all the literature around the solutions as well, your proposal should summarize the ask and a problem statement, so that right before you get into your goals and objectives, you just state very clearly what the problem is. So I'm just using this as an example. In Hollow Water, the number of women who have had no or minimal prenatal care is alarming, and it has worsened in recent years since the pandemic. The number of small for gestational age babies have doubled in the past 5 years. So this is evidence that you've seen in your community. This proposal outlines a research project that will introduce and evaluate a culturally grounded circle of care approach to prenatal care. So bang, just a couple of sentences that the reviewers know exactly what your problem is and what you're asking and what you're proposing to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about goals and objectives. Goals are broader in a research proposal. Normally, we don't like to see more than 5. My personal preference is 3. And these goals have to be SMART goals, and that they state very specifically what the 3 objectives, for instance, in this case, you are hoping to achieve. So for the example, the hypothetical example I've been talking about, creating a culturally grounded model of care informed by our grandmothers in the community within the first year. And your second goal is to improve prenatal care rates in Hollow Water over the next 5 years. And then foster and strengthen family bonding over the next 5 years. And then using those SMART principles when you're creating these goals, make sure that they're specific, that they're measurable, attainable, and they have realistic timelines. And most funding projects or funding calls for funding run in 5-year cycles. So you have to keep in mind that you have to be able to implement this and evaluate it within 5 years. And then beyond that, you'll have a year or 2 to publish your results. And then the objectives each are attached to the goals. So those can be more specific and refined, that they are related to their goals. So for instance, when you want to create a culturally grounded model of care informed by grandmothers within the first year, so your first objective is to establish a grandmother's council. Number 2, you want to be able to create the model of care, so on and so forth. So you clearly outline those objectives that are tied to that goal. And the methodology, and I'm just very cognizant of time here. Methodology, is a little different than methods. Methodology will often speak to the approach that you will be using to do the research itself. And for instance, there are two wide seeing approaches where you want to use a combination of Western and Indigenous methodology. In my dissertation, I created what I called an Anishinaabe methodology, and it was very simple. And that was a two-pillared approach where you listen at the beginning of your research project, and you listen to the insights of the grandmothers and the knowledge keepers to be able to speak to the issue. And then at the end, you listen again once you have information and data that you generated from your research project, you bring it back to the grandmothers or the knowledge keepers, and then you listen again to see what insights they have and that they can provide to your research. And this, these Indigenous methodologies are have been sometimes not, I guess, been considered valid in the research in the Western science world, but have been gaining more and more traction in Indigenous-led research, because we want to be able to incorporate our Indigenous knowledge, our Indigenous science, and we want to create research that is more meaningful. So, and now reviewers are becoming more and more informed about these methodologies and how important they are to Indigenous research. And but sometimes occasionally you'll get a reviewer that has not a clue, and then you'll have to provide a lot of justification of why you want to do this research in this particular way. But like I said, I've been a reviewer on the other end, and I've reviewed proposals that was that had research that impacted Indigenous people, but it was clear that the researchers had no clue how to engage Indigenous people, how to use and to incorporate elements of Indigenous methodologies. And that funding proposal, I did not recommend that it be funded until they went back and they did their homework, and they actually did some community engagement. So again, the methodologies, the approach that you're going to use. And then when you talk about a design, it really depends on what you want to do. So if you were, for instance, you want to provide evidence that the circular model of care is going to work, you could do a survey. You could look at population health data and look at data that's housed at the Manitoba Centre for Health Policy to look at changes to see if there's any been changes to prenatal care rates, or you can collect this information in your own communities and conduct conversations with the grandmothers and the aunties and the women that are accessing prenatal care. You can have you can do a combination of both. You can have survey methods, population health data, or you can collect stories as well. So you can do different methods. Often research projects will incorporate a little bit of both. So having a mixed methods approach. So the methodology in the methods section will have to explain what your research design is. Is it a survey? You're doing population health data, looking at population level data, or you're doing qualitative interviews and having conversations. So you have to be very clear about what methods you're using, and it also has to align with the methodology. If you say you're going to use Indigenous methodology and then just collect surveys without any incorporating all of those elements that are important to Indigenous methodology, and that's including the voices and the perspectives of Indigenous people, that's not going to work. And so you may have to adapt your survey so that you're tapping into the insights and the knowledge that exists in those communities as well. And so your methods also have to explain that you will, for instance, form a grandmother's circle to obtain ideas and insights. And then you also have to be clear that those objectives and the outcomes that you identified, that you will be tracking and have a method for tracking whether those indicate or those processes are are making a difference in terms of prenatal care rates. So in terms of the analysis, how and how you summarize the data is very important. So this will be determined by what method you are using to collect the data. So surveys and qualitative data will often require you to collect demographic data on the participants as well, and keeping track of the summaries and means of their ages and so on and so forth. So if you're looking at quantitative data, you will often look at rates and proportions and associations. In qualitative data, sometimes you'll need to specify that you'll be collecting stories or conversations, and then you have to also specify whether you will be using some form of tool to analyze the data. And in academia, we often will use a tool called NVivo, and that is where you input all the transcripts, and that software will help you synthesize the information and identify some themes. So you have to be very specific about that. And then knowledge to action, they have to be, you have to be very clear about how you're going to share these findings. And the funding proposals will often ask you how you plan on disseminating these results. In academia, for many, many years, it was just publications, and they weren't too concerned about our communities and whether the information was even useful or beneficial to them. But now more and more funding agencies will now ask how this information will benefit the people themselves. So, and then being very clear about how you're going to tailor those findings to that specific population, whether you're going to be using infographics or posters or conducting community workshops or using broadcasts or podcasts or even video and social media clips. So the proposal has to have a very clear plan about how you're going to disseminate the results. And then having a budget and references and other supporting information. Often your proposal will have a limit of 15 or 20 pages, and your budget and all of the supporting documentation goes into the appendices. But just as you had in Carla's presentation, timelines, often the funders will require you to have a spreadsheet or some kind of method of identifying the timeframes for each of the phases of the projects, and then when you expect for the data collection to occur, and then when you will expect to have some outcomes in terms of publications or reports or whatever it is. And so that's it. And I think I might have just run out of time.
Yay. Thank you so much. So thank you so much, Dr. Wanda Phillips-Beck, for sharing. In the chat box, we thank you so much for joining us today. We did share some information for you. So if you'd like copies of the proposal or the presentation or the recording, to email us. And then as well as we have one webinar left in our series, which is on Archives 101. So the sign up link is in the chat box. And we also have a call for stories and knowledge open right now for our First Nations Data Sovereignty and First Nations Conference called our theme is Our Data, Our Truths, Our Voice. So the link is there. Registration should be open soon as well. But we thank you so much for joining us. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Have a great day.